Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. This is your captain, Randy Wright speaking, and as always, I'm joined on our state-of-the-art radio program by my first officer, Jeremy Grapington. Folks, this will be the final boarding call, so if you please, claim your seats, fasten your seat belts, kick back, relax, and enjoy the show while Jeremy and I go ahead and delve into the pre-flight checklist, as there really is a lot of news and information to get to before we may fully indulge you with your in-flight entertainment. Well, folks, we see that we've heard about the Russian threat of nuclear war if the American electorate refused to elect Donald J. Trump in this presidential election cycle. And of course, what's so baffling about all of this is that we know that Donald Trump has all of those connections with Russia. We know that he has had previous connections through his ousted campaign leader, who was Paul Manafort, and we know that he went in front of the cameras of the graduates of Pavlov School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media during that first presidential debate and literally told a bald-faced lie to the American people when he said that he had no connections with Russia, that he had never done any business in Russia. But we know that's not true. We know that he had plans for a Trump hotel in Russia, but nobody could afford it because of the way that he wanted to price gouge with it. We know that he had done all sorts of rather seedy business type deals in Russia, and that all of this comes to the forefront and shows that he's just untrustworthy. I mean, we know that he lies. We know that he has that penchant for lying, and that he has done that over and over again ad nauseum. And so when you're dealing with something as important as the highest office in the land, you have to be able to trust the volition of what the office holder says and what they believe in. And in the case of Trump, he just does not believe in any of that. He believes that he can do anything that he wants to, and that's why in the past he has praised dictators such as the Chinese response to Tiananmen Square back in the 1980s, the way that the North Korean generals just bowed down to Kim Jong-il, the now late Kim Jong-il, and the way that he said that the Soviets had a good system. You see, these sorts of things are not compatible with our constitutionally endowed federalist representative Republican form of government. And unless and until we begin to hold our candidates' feet to the fire, we're going to continue to see these problems come forth. And another avenue of this, where it's just so glaring and blatantly obvious that we have a problem, is that Trump had gone forth, if you recall, and essentially requested that the Russians hack into Hillary Clinton's email server. Now, granted, we don't like Hillary Clinton. We don't like the fact that she had, in direct violation of federal law, kept emails on a private server. But the fact that Trump went out there and literally requested for the Russians, who are not looking out for America's best interest, to essentially engage in cyber espionage against the United States, that gives me a reason to pause, just as it should give every decent, hardworking, red-blooded American citizen reason to pause. Because everywhere we turn, we see that Trump is essentially engaging in this sort of unprecedented behavior, because when you do that, you are quintessentially asking someone to weaken the United States, to work against the best interests of the United States. And I think that this does not play out well for the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours, we the people. And therefore, we have to be cognizant of these dangers.
This is just another example of Trump being consistently inconsistent.
Mm-hmm.
Why would a person that's seeking the highest office in our land be an advocate of another country who, let's face it, there hasn't been any love lost between the United States and Russia? There was never really any kind of association that was fruitful between both nations. but yet he's advocating for them to attack the United States with cyber terrorism, regardless of who the emails are or who they belong to or which political affiliation they belong to. You still don't do that. You cannot advocate for that and then turn right around and say, I'm going to make America great again. Well, doing those things is not indicative of being a righteous leader of the free world. It's not indicative of following the Constitution. If he's willing to have an outside entity come in and at the drop of a hat violate any kind of laws or rights of any other people, what's stopping him from violating the rights of, the people he governs over? Nothing. Not a damn thing. And as far as all these connections with Russia and Trump, remember, what was it, the Miss Universe contest? The Miss Universe pageant held in Moscow? He sat right there with Putin. 2013, I think it was. He sat right there with Putin.
I believe so, yeah.
His daughter Ivanka Trump was having a play date with Putin's daughters. Yeah. And people think, oh, he doesn't have any ties. He doesn't sell anything. Here's the thing. Everybody that is supporting Trump is accusing Hillary Clinton of selling secrets to the Russians, to the Chinese. We know for a fact that the Clinton administration sold secrets to the Chinese. That's been proven. That's documented. But to make an accusation that she's selling secrets, nuclear secrets to Russia, how do we know that he hasn't been doing that? Look at all the dealings. He says he travels the world. He does business all over the world. How do we know he hasn't had some clandestine meeting with Putin or any of his underlings trading information? Maybe information from other countries, other business leaders or world leaders that he's done business with. How do we know Trump's not the one playing both sides or playing all sides against each other?
Well, we certainly know that Paul Manafort had connections in the Ukraine with the pro-Russian group that sat there. I believe his name was Yushchenko, who was giving him just millions of dollars per day almost. And it was all done to rig the Ukraine's elections. Now, what is to prevent Paul Manafort from rigging our elections? It's funny that Trump would be the loudest in complaining about that, in claiming that our system is rigged. Well, if you stop and think about it, I think he doth protest too much, particularly when you see the type of people that he surrounded himself with. Now, I'm not one to delve into conspiracy theories, but that is what Trump loves to run out there and say. Now, it is interesting because one of the things that was put out in the news today from I'm drawing a blank on his name at the moment. He was the one that left Breitbart and is at the Daily Wire now. It'll come to me.
Yeah, I can't remember his name either.
It was he who sat there and was basically saying the Trump camp is losing all on its own. It's not some conspiracy theory. It is Trump that's doing it to himself, because he's been going out. It was Ben Shapiro. That was his name.
Yeah.
It was that Trump is essentially shooting himself in his foot, that he doesn't know how to bring himself back in. He doesn't know how to control himself. And as a direct result of that, he is losing. And of course, Trump doesn't want to listen to people. I mean, he's got Kellyanne Conway there, and he's clearly not listening to her. He's clearly going out and doing everything, in my mind, to intentionally lose this election. And you know what it brings to my mind? We all know the story of the Manchurian Candidate, where there was a candidate who was running for president of the United States of America who had been basically brainwashed by the communists to just snap and begin destroying the country from within, to begin pushing for the communist plan as opposed to the best interests of the United States. Well, that's kind of where we are now. And I think it's interesting that the way that Trump and all of his surrogates have been handling each and every slew of the cornucopia of scandals that have come up as of late is to say they're lying. I know that Ben Carson went on MSNBC and even demanded that they cut one of the co-hosts' mics because she wasn't letting him speak, saying that, well, you're just here to paint me as the bad guy. No, Dr. Ben, I'm a victim. Get me a new suit, Carson, the rocket surgeon. That's not what they were doing. The fact that you have gone out there and said that we should essentially abandon our conservative values and principles and our Christian values and principles speaks volumes about what it is that you're doing and what it is that your leader is doing. And none of that is operating in the best interest of the American people. And I think that that is something that we really need to have a conversation about. The external influences are coinciding with these internal corruptions and lack of decency that is apparently becoming a new norm in American politics. And what's really staggering about this is everybody keeps saying that it's the graduates of Pavlov School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media that's lying about all of this. But the problem is the timing is bad. Trump should have taken the sting out of this. Trump knew that that was coming because we knew that it was coming. And if we knew that it was coming, surely the professionals and the bestliest people that he surrounds himself with would know, but they've been acting like they're completely oblivious to it.
You know what else this reminds me of, Randy? It reminds me of the turning point in which Hitler came to power. Right. Remember the destruction of the Weimar Republic? Mm-hmm. That's essentially what the GOP is now. They are the Weimar Republic. That's what they've evolved into. That's what they've become. And it's not so much as Trump being Hitler all on his own doing this. We can look at the Clinton camp that are espousing is what I call Clintonism, i.e. communism and whatnot. Just like Hitler used all the other leaders that set him up to be chancellor and this and that, and the Nazi party came back and they propped him up. Well, that's what the Clintons are doing. They're setting this up to be exactly the way it was that Nazi Germany came about. The GOP is the Weimar Republic. The Democratic Party, they're nothing more than the National Socialist Party that went away but has come back and come back in full force. And Trump is their golden boy. Now, the catch to this is, we've stated, Trump has no intention of winning. I think Trump is just nothing more than a mouthpiece. And with all of his connections that he has to Russia, he's going to be utilized. Hell, we can call him, I can't think of the guy's name that Hitler took over. He was president while Hitler was chancellor.
Von Paul. Oh, you're talking. No. Yeah, von Hindenburg. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, von Hindenburg. That's more or less what we're looking at as Trump being, but in a sense of actually not being in power. Mm-hmm. Hindenburg was ousted. He lost total control. Hitler, as chancellor, demanded full power.
What happened with von Hindenburg is that he was frail. He was sick, and Hitler would not accept the position of vice chancellor. He wanted to be chancellor because the president served kind of as a king. That's the parliamentary system of the Reichstag was that way. And because the Nazi Party had managed to secure a majority position within the number of votes, he would not accept vice chancellorship. Von Papen, who had been the conservative prime minister or chancellor before Hitler, said, I think we can control him. And so Hindenburg allowed him to become chancellor. Then what happened is Hindenburg began dying. I mean, he was on his deathbed, and that is when Hitler merged the office of president and chancellor to create Der Führer. Mm-hmm. And with Der Führer, he was able to take control of everything. That's when all of the oaths of loyalty directly to Hitler came into place. That's when the Weimar Republic just vanished. And then he outlawed all other German parties. And of course, he did this initially with the Enabling Act after the Reichstag fire. Everybody thought that it was the the communists that did it. In fact, it was a mentally challenged Dutch communist by the name of van der Lubbe, who had been caught and whom they placed the blame of the fire on. But whether it was the communists or whether it was the Nazis that set the fire, we really don't know. It certainly wouldn't be something to put past the communists, but I wouldn't put it past the Nazis either, given just how lustful for power Hitler was. And so this played out in that fashion. I think where Trump's actually a little more deadly than all of that is that he's coming in not so much to have power, but he's separating government and media away from it. Because under Hitler and the way the Democrats have been running it, they're trying to combine it, to make it all one thing, like a ministry of propaganda, the way that Goebbels had run the entire ministry of propaganda. Trump wants to be the minister of propaganda. Trump wants to create his own network that's going to just be able to make him money. And so recall that back in 2000, he had said that he would be the first presidential candidate in the entire history of our electoral process who would actually make money running for president. And I think that this is what it boils down to. This is something that has been 16 years in the making. And so that would be the only way that Trump is patient. Trump is patient to get money, but that's it. Nothing else.
Right. And all of this, again, I think it unfolds in a more expeditious fashion rather than Trump actually having that seat of power. It's almost like he was already granted it. Now he's already stepping out of the way. And again, remember that we have, for the better part of the year, said that he has no intentions of winning. He has no intentions of actually holding the seat of the office of the presidency. He only wants to do this to grow his own wealth. And I think by doing this and doing the things that he's doing, it's much akin, like you said, with Goebbels being the minister of propaganda, so on and so forth. So all that plays in, and it's history repeating itself, but with a more modern twist. They've figured out what didn't work for the Fabians, for the Nazis and the socialists, and now they think they have figured out what might work. But the only way they're going to know if it works is if they actually implement it. And what better way to get everybody involved than to divide and conquer, divide everybody away from their principles, get everybody to join in on what their propaganda is, or the Trumpaganda, and that way they can conquer them. But see, what they fail to realize is that there's individuals like yourself and me, and our first Air Marshal Nelson Ward, and a vast number of individuals that see right through this. We see the play that they're utilizing here, and the card they have up their sleeve, and we've caught them at cheating. The voter fraud does absolutely come into play with this. We know that George Soros has been active in voter fraud over God knows how long. It's been proven. Now he's being accused of voter fraud in 12 different states that were dealing with primary votes and whatnot. I guess the machines were defunct or they weren't registering the things that they were supposed to. We know Soros had a hand in the elections down in Brazil and in Venezuela with those machines. So we have to look at this. Trump has ties and connections with Soros. Soros is involved in voter fraud. We know that Trump has been involved in voter fraud. There was Alabama and I think Nevada and a couple of other states where the votes were recounted. They were questioned during the primary, and Trump threw a fit. The election's rigged. Well, see, he's telling people the truth. He's just masquerading it out there and putting his own spin on it. He's telling them the truth, but he's sugarcoating it to where people buy into it, but they don't believe the whole truth. He's telling them exactly what his plans are, but he's doing it. And he's got them beguiled and just completely mysticized by his quaff, I guess. So it's just a horrid mess, this whole thing. But this is exactly what they want. This is their plan all along. And they don't like it when people like us come, find out about these things and we bring it to the forefront.
Yeah, and there's something I want to tie in here because, a lot of the Lion Branch Trumpidians congregating there in their Lion Branch Trumpidian tabernacle have come forth and said, really, what pain is this connection with Russia going to cause to the American people? I mean, Vladdy Putin is a great leader, a bigly leader that's done so much for Russia. Well, Moon Battery has put out an interesting piece where it said that one of the leaked emails from Hillary describes how the Russians have been behind this effort to fund the anti-fracking oil movements in the United States. Now, folks, think about this for a moment. Russia's economy is almost completely centralized around and galvanized around oil. And so they have big shale there, and they want to be able to flood the markets because that allows them to have control over it. And therefore, they don't like it when America is basically cheapening the price of a barrel of oil, because then it means that all of their imperialistic goals, and they clearly have imperialistic goals, that's what they've been doing in the Ukraine, that's what they've been doing in the Crimea, and it's all because they want to be able to fund their expansionism. But when we have fracking, which allows us to produce oil much cheaper than it could otherwise be produced, that works against their twisted goals and machinations. And so, of course, Putin is going to go forth and try and deliberately establish a movement that sits there and weakens the United States. And again, folks, this is the kind of external influence that a Manchurian candidate style scenario would suggest. And therefore, I think we do have to pay attention to some of these complaints that have been levied against Trump because of all of those connections that Trump has with the Russians, that goes all the way back with Paul Manafort, and of course with his ideas of wanting to put hotels there. And then, of course, we know that the Czech Thumper's father in Slovenia had been a Communist Party member. He's now retired. How are we to know that she wouldn't sell American secrets to the enemy? How do we know that she would be loyal to the United States? You see, these are the sorts of things that I think we need to ask questions about. And it's not that I have anything against people from Slovenia. It's just that when you have that kind of track record, when you have something that is sketchy like Trump's past, these are things that we need to keep in mind. And of course, that's not to say that Hillary Clinton isn't going to have deals that would be detrimental to the United States. I mean, that is certainly what the Clintons have been known for. We've already mentioned how Bill had sold secrets to the Chinese to the to diametrically impact and detrimentally impact the United States. These are the sorts of things that I think need to be examined, but the graduates of Pavlov School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media don't want to cover it because, again, they are operating to promote and advocate for this frothing at the mouth, Fabian socialist propagandistic agenda that really does not have the best interest of the American people at heart. That is something that we have been warning about for well over a year here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, because it is a serious contention. It is something that I think we have to be cognizant and aware of. Otherwise, they're just going to think that they have carte blanche to do whatever the hell they want.
Well, it's interesting you should mention Malaria Trump and the potential or possibility that if she does become the first lady, contrary to popular belief, she would have access to so many things. So many things that she wouldn't even be able to comprehend or understand. And really, in all honesty, what would stop her from leaking something out, or anybody leaking something out? Here's another scary thought. Hillary's elected. What's stopping Bill Clinton from leaking something out?
Nothing.
Nothing.
Absolutely nothing.
Absolutely nothing. We know the dealings that Trump has with individuals all over the world. He's bragged about it. He's always put himself up on a pedestal, saying he walks into a room, people do what he says. You know, he says this, they do it, and everything's happy, and he gets what he wants. It's a scary thought. we have to look at, and I think this is why when we have certain offices of authority in which people are to be elected to, such scrutiny has to be placed on that. So the vetting process has to be bar none. You have to dig and delve into each and every nook and cranny. And see, I have no intentions of ever running for public office. I love my freedom too much. I don't want people prying into my personal lives. Now, people would say, well, that's probably because you have something to hide. No, I just don't like people sticking their nose where it doesn't belong. However, since I'm not running for office, I have every right to know everything that's going on with every candidate. In fact, the American people have every right to know what's going on, because these individuals are supposed to be representatives of we the people. Again, if Trump wants to think of this as a business, he would be our employee. If anybody runs a business, you do a background check on those prospective employees, you interview them, you go through, you find out as much as you can. Why? Because you want a productive employee. You want somebody who's going to do what they're supposed to do to produce quality work for you. And if there's anything in their past or anything in their background that may pose an issue with that, you don't hire them. Mm-hmm. Trump has more than enough baggage, more than enough. And really, honestly, when it comes down to it, the only thing that we need to look at, as we've mentioned numerous times before, what is his stance on the Constitution? We know what his stance is. He sees no value in it. He's never read it because he doesn't see any intrinsic value in it. Therefore, he shouldn't hold the office, period.
No.
Or anybody else.
How could he take that oath? How can you take an oath of office to uphold and defend the Constitution to the best of your ability if you don't believe that there's any value in the Constitution? And as we have so oft times reiterated before, pursuant to Article 6, Clause 2, what's commonly referred to as the Supremacy Clause, there is a hierarchical scheme that's set up with the Constitution itself being the supreme law of the land. Now, of course, these are the sorts of things that the media doesn't want to talk about, that the historical revisionists don't want to talk about, and certainly the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists don't want to talk about. Because, again, what they're wanting to do is to essentially tear down our federalist representative republic. Everybody gets this idea of federal just meaning the top of the government. But in federalism, we really do have a tiered system. And it's based off of the natural order of things, or the natural law tenets that are immutable and form the bedrock foundation and cornerstone of not only our shared United States Constitution, but also our republic. And basically what it means is that we, the people, are the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty. But Trump doesn't believe that. We've seen that with the way that with the Bureau of Land Management, Manipulation, and Malarkey, he's wanting the Fed government to continue to hold all of that power because he says he wants the land to be great, and he doesn't think that the states can handle it or the private citizens can handle it. And then when you look at the way that he has abused eminent domain, that too tells us that he is not going to sit there in the highest office of the land and run it as though it were a limited thing. You see, because the office of president has departed so far from just the few little duties that are enumerated to it by Article 2, you have to have somebody in there with restraint. Neither Hillary Clinton nor Donald Trump have any modicum of restraint. They are going to go hog wild with it, for lack of a better term. In other words, they're going to expand the scope and power of the federal government. They are going to further indebt the United States. And I think that we are going to see increased problems on the global theater. Because essentially, under these disastrous 2 terms of the Barack Hussein Obama regime, Vladimir Putin has been able to go out and just do whatever he wants. He is literally testing the United States, and we are sparking or seeing the initial sparks of a new Cold War that could easily go hot in an instant. In fact, the UN ambassador to Russia has said that U.S.-Russian relations are at an all-time low point, except for any other time period but 1973. This is the worst it's been since 1973. Now, folks, 1973 was before Glasnost had been started with Brezhnev. That was when the Soviet hardliners were in, and they were seeking to expand their power. Recall that it was just a decade later, if even that far, that they were getting involved in Afghanistan with them, and we had started supplying the Mujahideen, which of course came back to bite us. But it goes to show that if our relations, and if the tensions are as high as they were when the Soviet Union was in power, that means we've got some major problems just over the horizon. And I don't think either one of the two mainstay candidates are equipped to handle this. I don't think that they are the right people for it. I don't think they are qualified to handle it.
Well, it makes me wonder why Putin's number two guy would come out and say that if Trump is not elected, then there's potential for nuclear war or World War III essentially beginning. Mm-hmm. I think within that statement, it is the underlying reason of why they would make that. See, they want someone like Trump to be elected because it would allow them to have enough space and distance away to where they can keep doing what they're doing now, and it will allow them time enough to build up to where they can implement things. Because let's face it, Putin wants to take it back. He wants Russia to be the way it was at the beginning of between World War I and World War II. That's how he is looking at Russia. Even before then, even before World War I, he wants to take it back to
reestablish the Tsar.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So that's what he wants. And in order to get that, he has to have the right type of individual sitting in office here in the United States. Somebody he can finagle, someone he can finesse and bump uglies with if need be, in order to get what he wants. See, Putin is not an idiot. Putin is not crazy. People would say he's nuts. He's methodical. And all sociopaths are methodical. Okay? He's thinking this out. He's being patient with it. He's doing just the right moves at just the right time in order to set things up. Having this statement come out about, if Trump's not elected, then the world faces World War III and nuclear devastation. That's known as fear-mongering. Mm-hmm. That's what that is. They're doing that. They're making that play in order to position themselves in a strategic stance to where they can implement what they really want to implement 3, 4, 10 years down the road. Now, they know that if Hillary Clinton was in there, guess what? They won't be able to do it to the way that they want to do it because it'll take them longer. Okay, and here's why. Because Hillary Clinton will actually, I believe, she will try to stand up and say, no, this isn't going to happen. Because if she didn't do that, the United States, for sure, would remove her from office in probably the most obscene and cruelest way anybody can imagine. Because people would not stand for that. And then, folks, that's when we have what's known as the SHTF or SHTF scenario. Putin doesn't want that to escalate at that point. He wants it to escalate on his time frame. Not when we say so, but when he dictates it. And that's the problem. And having Trump in there will allow him to do that. Having Hillary Clinton in there, it won't allow him to do that. And then everything will be just heightened and come to fruition as far as, the end of the world, so to speak, will happen just that much faster. So now people are looking at that scenario and say, well, I would rather have Trump in there. At least we have a few more years left on this planet rather than Hillary. Stop buying into the fear and propaganda. This is what you should be thinking of instead of Trump or Hillary. Why don't we put somebody in there that won't allow any of that to happen?
Well, yeah, that's what we're supposed to do. That's why the American people have the primary process. It is to vet the candidates that are vying for the highest office in the land. And unfortunately, in this fiasco of a 2016 presidential election cycle, I think we dropped the ball. Because when you stop and think about it, we had the opportunity to place a constitutional compositionist, someone who was literally going to go by strict adherence of what is contained within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution with Texas Senator Ted Cruz. And instead, people bought into the propaganda. They allowed themselves to be whipped up into a raw emotional frenzy, which, as we have so oft times reiterated on previous episodes, it leaves you susceptible to fall to the twisted machinations of a carnival barker, a con artist, a snake oil salesman like Trump. But more so than that, we see that with Trump lying about Russia, we know that his running mate, Mike Pence, has come out and said that he thinks that the great weight of the evidence demonstrates that the hacking of the Democrats' email server and even Hillary Clinton's email server seems to suggest Russia. But Trump continues to go in front of the cameras of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media and say, we don't know who it could be. It could be the Chinese. It could be the Mexicans. It could be me. It could be you. We just don't know. My hands are smally. You see, when you have that sort of dichotomy, when you have that sort of disagreement within your own ticket, of course, Hillary Clinton is going to run with that. And this is why I think that anyone who associates with the Trump train is going to come out of it with their reputation in shambles, because they are literally going forth and allowing themselves to be put forth with this group that lies. Trump is consistently inconsistent. He does not tell the truth. I think he's a pathological liar. Certainly, the great weight of the evidence would indicate that he is, and I think that we can't just ignore any of that that's happening right now, because when you think about what Trump and Pence are claiming to do, make America great again. Well, how are you going to do that when you can't even agree on what your message is? I mean, that is accepting the argument, which we don't, that America ever once ceased being great. And you see, that's the other thing. Hillary Clinton has been able to use that now in both debates. And she said, America never stopped being great. And I hate that Trump has essentially allowed her to have that talking point, because, again, that makes her appear to be coming from a position of strength and of common sense. And so if Trump is supposed to hire the best people, why is it that we are seeing over and over again ad nauseum that his public relations team can't control him? They can't get a cohesive message out, and they contradict each other all the way down. And so this is why he's tanking. It's because he's shooting himself in the foot and shooting the Republican Party in the head at the same time. We can't just allow this to continue unabated, because what it is going to do is tarnish the conservative image. And in fact, that's already started. We showed it with that John Oliver clip in a few shows back. We see that they say that you can't escape it. And that was one of the dire warnings that we had given to Mark Levin when he first decided to board the Trump train, because we said, yes, while you may go out there and speak into that microphone of yours and say that you can't be held accountable for the stupid things that Trump has said or the stupid things that Trump's surrogates have said, everybody's going to hold you accountable for that, because you said you're going to vote for them, and that is the ultimate endorsement. And while endorsing a candidate, that means you're supporting their positions. You have adopted those positions as your own. It's why Alexander Hamilton said that if you must have an enemy at the head of power, let it be somebody for whom you have no responsibility for. Otherwise, you're going to be tarred and feathered.
Well, it brings up the point, too, with conservatism being basically obliterated, exterminated. Because Hillary Clinton has actually come out and said, look, I'm reverting back to and relying on the conservative principles that I was raised with by my father.
Who was a Goldwater Republican.
And Hillary Clinton even said that she's a Goldwater girl numerous times. Now, See, she understands, and this is what makes her dangerous, and this is what makes Trump nothing more than a tool that cannot be used for anything to fix anything. It's a useless tool because he's out there. He's destroying the conservative movement. He's destroying conservatism every time he opens his mouth. And she sees that and she's taking it, just like we said she would do, Randy. We said that she would annihilate him on the whole "I'm going to make America great again" thing. And she did it in both debates. She's taking conservatism and putting it out there as if she was raised with conservative values, which she may very well have been. But the fact is, when it's coming from her, not only does it completely destroy everything that Trump wants to say, it drives the final nail in the coffin of conservatism because we know what she's all about. Trump lit the fire, and all she's doing is fanning the flames, and we're all going to be reduced to cinders because of this. This is why I say that the GOP is akin to the Weimar Republic. And that's just the way it boils down to. So with her doing all of this stuff, we've said that she's dangerous. And people always, nitpicking with the media about, well, they're not talking about Hillary's shortcomings. It's all focused on Trump and this and that. You know why? Because the media is stupid. They're not looking at both sides of this. They're fixated and focused on it, innate, minuscule, nonsensical crap that has no bearing on this election, no bearing in the ultimate scheme of things, which is the loss of our rights and the destruction of our Constitution and our republic. They don't want to focus on that because, like you said, it's what the Democrats are doing, the Fabians are doing. They're melding the government and media together. Trump wants to separate the two. Well, here's the thing. In a way, Trump is correct in wanting to separate the two, but the ultimate end thing with him is he wants to be able to control the media. To my knowledge, Randy, and in my recollection, the media should be controlled by the people, just like everything else in this country.
Yes.
Freedom of the press. The media should be held accountable by whom? We the people. We the people are not holding the media accountable. That's the problem. Everybody wants to complain about it. Well, instead of complaining about it, why don't you do something about it? I've said for a long time, the only way to fix the media is to infiltrate the media and destroy it from within. Get rid of the rogue elements in there and bring it back to under the visage of we the people. And I think that's what we set out to do here.
It is. And that's part of what makes social media so powerful. You see, social media is a double-edged sword. Yes, it can be, allowed to make stupid things come to fruition. It can be utilized in such a way as to make the lowest elements of society become the loudest voices, such as people like Alex Jones. I mean, he got his start with the emergence of social media, and that's why you see all of those conspiracy theories, like how he was crying about the fish people, all of that crap. But what it really comes down to is that Trump is wanting to be a bit like a combination of Matt Drudge and William Randolph Hearst. William Randolph Hearst is the one that was the father of what would become modern journalism. He was the father of yellow journalism and sensationalism, and all of this worked to create the sort of quagmire that we have, and it has colored the way that we approach reality, the way that we approach elections, and it literally means that the media has been leading us around on a short leash to try and control popular opinion, to basically try and control the destiny of the United States. But again, that just doesn't work when you get down to who we are supposed to be, both as a nation and as a people. Because as Sam Adams said, we were supposed to be a virtuous republic. That means that the people have to be knowledgeable about the way that their republic works. It means that they had to vet their candidates to ensure that they have a high moral standing. But it's as the way that the great visionary Zygmunt Dobbs had said in his magnus opus of Keynes at Harvard, it's that the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists are working in such a way as to basically through draconian measures and being overzealous. They work to micromanage the facets of our daily lives so that we are all so caught up in just trying to carve out a living for ourselves, just trying to sustain our standard of living and what we've come to expect, that it comes back to when it's important that we be paying attention to what's going on, we just lack the political capital and energy to spend on it. And so that ensures that we're weakened. And then they engage in the sorts of semantics that we've been warning about since our premiere episode, which aired on September 11th of 2015, to again, change traditional meanings of words so that the words are being used to mean what they want them to mean. And so that way they can seem benign, when in fact they're dark and twisted goals and machinations are horrific. And if people fully understood the great extent of what it is that they were preaching and trying to thrust upon us, they would recoil in horror. Because what it is completely diametrically opposed to the natural law tenets that underpin our country. And so you see all of these little dots that are seemingly unconnected or disconnected and have no relation to one another are actually intricately interwoven. And again, it's why it is so important for us to take a step back and to read between the lines to see what it is that's actually threatening the country, so that we can then begin to take the steps that are necessary, as only we can, to place the nation back onto the path of prosperity. But so many people have bought into this lie that you can have a messianic figure come and do this. This is why raw emotionalism, once again, is so dangerous. It's what Trump has done. He's tapped into legitimate, righteous indignation and anger, but he has basically utilized it in such a way as to weaken the nation.
Staying with the whole theme of external influences and whatnot, a lot of people would say that, because we're railing against the media right now, say, well, that's not really an external influence. Well, actually it is, because we know through social media that anybody in the world, wherever they are, if they have an internet connection, they could see individuals and hear individuals like Mark Levin, Rush Limbaugh, Hannity, even CNN. Let's just look at all the media figureheads, ourselves included. See, there's a big distinction between what we're doing and the message we're bringing to individuals as opposed to everybody else. We've mentioned this before. Everybody else brings up all the problems, but I have yet to hear anybody mention any solutions other than us. And the only solution that is viable is getting back to the Constitution, period. Now, we've heard Levin talk about, these things are unconstitutional. Beck has talked about them being unconstitutional, even Hannity, and even some individuals like Joe Scarborough on Morning Joe
Mm-hmm.
Has even brought up the constitutionality of certain things. But that's where they leave it. They just bring it up and they don't discuss it. They bring it up, they don't expound on it or expand on it and explain why it's unconstitutional. They just leave it as mentioning the Constitution. So I don't know if they do that as a way of saying, well, we talked about the Constitution, but no, you didn't. You mentioned it in passing. There's a big difference. And Randy, you and I have vowed that we're going to hold everybody accountable, and we expect everybody to hold us accountable for what we do. I'm not going to stop doing that. I don't care if it's Glenn Beck, Mark Levin, Joe Scarborough, Sean Hannity, or any other pundit or political analyst out there. If you allow yourself to become part of the problem and you're regurgitating and perpetuating the propaganda, you're in our sights. We're going to take aim and we're going to shoot you down. Because that's what needs to happen. That is the only way that we can get back to any modicum of sanity of what our republic is supposed to be. It's the only way that the ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we the people, can actually grab hold of the reins and do what we're supposed to do as our civic duty and obligation as citizens.
Right. And one of the things is the reason that so many external elements have been able to infiltrate into and have an influence upon our electoral process is because we have essentially been vacating in our duty. We have been derelict as a nation and as a people for paying attention. I've heard all throughout this 2016 presidential election cycle that, well, I never once really cared about the primary process. I didn't think it was important. No, each and every step of the process is important. Yes, we have to be involved because, again, it is our duty, our obligation, and above all, our responsibility as the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours to literally maintain the sanctity of government, to go forth and ensure that government is working as it was originally intended. And so that is a heavy burden and duty and obligation as well as responsibility, but it is ours. And what we have done is by sitting there saying that, well, gee, I've never really thought it's important. I didn't think that it would be that big or influential, so therefore I just didn't pay attention to it. That is how these external elements begin to have an impact. And then what it shows is when all of a sudden these people who have stopped participating or just now all of a sudden believe that there is some important thing that would drive them back into the electoral process, it's through fear-mongering. Things like saying that if the American electorate fails to put Donald Trump into the White House, then that is going to cause nuclear war. Folks, that is exactly what happens. It is essentially there is a power vacuum, and these external nefarious forces are attempting to fill the gap. They are attempting to stabilize the void that has been left, to fill that void that has been left. And so it allows us to be manipulated. And when it allows us to be manipulated, it means that we are losing control of our nation. And again, that explains why it is so important that we foster that fluent and working knowledge and understanding of the Constitution and thereby our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. Because with each and every right that has been endowed to us by our Creator, the God of nature himself, there is couched with it an equal and just as powerful duty, obligation, but above all, responsibility. And what that means for the overarching rights that we have is that we must proactively maintain and safeguard those rights. And see, I think that we have become a little too complacent. And again, that creates a power vacuum. That is why you see the Democrats just so willingly running out to try and go after guns, to try and encroach upon our due process rights. Again, they think that the American people have been pushed so close to the precarious edge of that cliff that it's just going to take one little nudge and we're going to topple over into it, and that will be the destruction of this republic as we know and love it. But of course, that is not what we can allow to have happen, because if we do that, it's as you've said before, without our rights, we are left with nothing. Truly, we would be left with nothing.
Now, Randy, I have a confession to make, and I'm going to do it right here now in front of God and everybody. Up until this election cycle, I never voted in the primary process because I did believe, and I had the notion that, it was pointless to vote in the primary process because ultimately it didn't matter that we're going to get the candidates that they're going to choose for us anyways. I voted in the primary process this time around because I came to the realization, just as you completely defined it, every step of the electoral process is important, just as important as the next step and the step previous to it. So I was part of the problem, and I freely admit that. And see, folks, this is a sense of empowerment that we're trying to bring to you. It's okay when you have viewpoints like that, and then you realize, and you have an awakening and a reality check. It's okay to mention those things, to have these types of confessions, because what that shows is that you've actually you've woken up, you've realized what's going on, and now you are prepared and willing to accept the responsibilities for your actions and to move on with them in a way that you are allowed to and actually obligated to under our Constitution, under what the true intents and purposes are of the ultimate wielders of sovereignty. So I never voted in the primary process before this year. And I'm glad that I did, because it actually gave me more in-depth sense of being in tune with the process, of really understanding what is really going on with this country. Now, I've always had an inkling or an idea that the government's gotten out of control. It's gotten too big. It needs to be reined in. Everything, the power and authority needs to be restored back with the people. But there's always something lacking. This is what the empowerment is designed to do. It gives people pause to think, am I missing something here? What am I missing? I need to do this. I need to do that. I have to have an understanding of this in order to accomplish this. And granted, Randy, we started this a year ago. Within that year, I've learned that even I am missing things. Even I don't fully understand the Constitution, because there are things that come up, such as voting in the primaries, that are specifically indicative of having the authority placed with me from the Constitution as an ultimate wielder of sovereignty. We have to always stay vigilant with this and always continue to learn. And again, I've mentioned this before. People say, well, I've learned everything I need to know. And my response is to them that, so you're a zombie. Because the only time you stop learning anything is when you're dead. Now, if you've died, you've stopped learning everything, and you're coming back to life. You're talking and breathing and speaking and walking and everything else. That tells me that, A, you haven't learned everything you need to know, which is most likely the case, or B, you've died and you've come back to life as a zombie. So we always have to strive to empower each other. Randy, you and I empower each other all the time. We have discussions, and we learn from each other on a constant basis. So what kind of individuals would we be when we sit here and speak into our microphones and tell individuals that listen to us, this is what we all need to do? What kind of individuals would we be if we didn't go out and do that? We would be nothing more than the charlatans and frauds that Trump surrounds himself with and wakes up every morning believing and bolstering himself up to be. Same with Hillary Clinton or any other individual that has that kind of logic and reasoning, if you want to call it that.
Right. And you see, part of what happens is when you also allow these power vacuums to come in, that's what begins to give credence to those erroneous type of arguments, so specious kind of arguments, such as those who are pushing for a tyranny of false unity, because they'll sit there and say that if you don't vote for the one that was selected in the primary process, then you are supporting Hillary Clinton. That's incorrect, because what happens is you vote for whom you support in the primary process. If the person that clinches the nomination cannot or does not stand for the principles and values that you hold near and dear, then that means you've already had the chance to vet. If they don't fit that, then you are under no obligation to vote for them in the general election. That does not all of a sudden magically give a vote for the other side. It just means that that candidate does not have your vote. It's not to say that it's giving addition to the other side. And that's part of the problem that I have with the specious argument of the lesser of two evils. When you keep voting for the lesser of two evils, you are going to set a pattern in the primary process where the most disgusting, the most dishonorable, the most terrible candidates are the ones that keep getting elected each and every time, or nominated rather, each and every time, to then go and fall to defeat in the general election cycle. And look, this pattern is undeniable. There is no way to deny that in 08, We had a terrible candidate with John McCain. We again had another terrible candidate in 2012 with Mitt Romney, and then again an even worse one in 2016 with Donald Trump. Donald Trump is the furthest to the left that we've had. Now, I've had dear friends of mine sit there and say that just because Donald Trump is not a conservative, that doesn't mean that he won't govern as one. Well, I'm sorry, but when his track record shows that he has never once held a truly conservative position for the vast majority of the 70 years that he has spent on God's green earth, it leads me to believe that he will not be a conservative when he's in power, that he will try and run away with this as he has each and every time in a way that serves his best interests. So that means paying lip service to conservatism and then turning his back on it. And then with the way that the external influence of Trump's candidacy being run basically like that of a reality television program, you see that he is already telling people to say, vote for me at the top of the ticket, but screw everybody down ticket. You see that that is the position that they have assumed. Now, that plays out as a disaster for him because, first of all, he's going to need Congress, except that in his mind, and what that tells me is that in his mind, he thinks he doesn't need Congress, that he can just do carte blanche as president because he'll be the bigliest dictator that the nation has. Or it tells me on the flip side that he is not serious about winning. And, you know, one of the things that my dear friend said was that his use of I, me, always mentioning himself, not talking about the proper constitutional constraints on government, as well as the separation of power, actually means that he's serious about it. And because he was willing to get so nasty in the primary process, also suggests that he's serious about it. But here's my problem. Here's the problem that I have with it. Why is it that he was willing to go after those who are allegedly in his same party with much greater zeal, with much greater viciousness and venom than he's ever once gone after Hillary Clinton? Have we heard him go after any Democratic senators? Have we heard him go after, say, Turbin Durbin or Chuck the Schmuck Schumer? Has he gone after Nasty Pelosi? No. We haven't heard any of their names mentioned other than being able to berate and belittle conservatives, trying to stick this whole muck and moreau that Trump has unleashed in the electoral process on all conservatives, whether they supported him or not. Think back again to that John Oliver clip we had played a few episodes back, where they were using that to attack Utah Senator Mike Lee the most, when Mike Lee has been a dyed-in-the-wool, never Trumper all along. He never once endorsed Trump. But that doesn't matter. They're using this to attack the conservative movement. They're using it to hit us with a stereotypical brush all the way through. And this is something that we have been warning about for well over a year now.
See, I want to read something from social media. An individual on Facebook. I'm not going to put their name out there. I'm just going to read what they posted. This is yesterday, roughly 8:15 in the morning Eastern time. This individual writes, and I responded to it, so I'll read what he wrote, and then I'll read my response. He says, So what are your principles? Do you think it's virtuous to cast a ballot for self-serving reasons? This isn't the primary. We need to compromise, or we will get used to hearing the words President Hillary. If we are to get out of this, we need to unite or forever be divided. Now, my response to this is very simple. And I rephrased this question or posed the question back to this individual. Okay? And I said, what are my principles? Simple. The United States Constitution, of which neither Trump nor Hillary give a damn about or even intend on following. Trump himself has said that he never read the Constitution because he never saw any value in it. Hillary wants to pervert it in order to bring about its destruction. In other words, both candidates are evil, and there is no distinction between evil. There's no distinction between the levels of evil they both exhibit. Evil equals evil, period. Now, this plays right into the voting of lesser of two evils thing. And again, we see this time and time where individuals are saying, well, Trump's not as bad as Hillary, or Hillary's not as bad as Trump, and I'm voting for Hillary. It doesn't matter. Folks, vote for whoever you want to vote for. We're not telling you who to vote for, but do so with the understanding that when you cast a vote for evil, just as Randy said, evil is always going to be there. It will always be rampant. The only way to vanquish evil is to have a vote for an individual who is not evil. Now, we could take it to the furthest dimension and furthest degree and attach a biblical notation to this, is saying we are all born sinners. And we are all sinners until we die. And when we die, essentially is when we have welcomed Christ into our hearts and we are born again as Christians. But even as born again Christians, people are sinners. Why? Because it's human nature. The only time you stop sinning is when you expire on this earth in your human form and you are a saved by grace and saved by the grace of God Christian, where you reside in heaven for eternity. That is when you stop sinning. Mm-hmm. So when you decide to vote for the lesser of two evils, that's something to where you can't knowingly commit a sin. Knowingly commit a sin, because when you condone evil, that is a sinful act. Knowingly commit a sin and then eventually say, well, I'll just, repent for it and I'll ask God's forgiveness for it. And you don't come back from something like that. Trump himself even says, well, I've never had to ask forgiveness for anything. Trump thinks that he is an individual who is without sin. Mm-hmm. That's a very disturbing thought. Very disturbing thought. And when people are aligning themselves with that, again, it comes back into the old adage, the most magnificent trick pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist. Trump is trying to convince the world that he is not evil. And if he does that and people succumb to it, they still are voting for evil.
I want to jump on something that friend of yours on social media said. He said that the time for compromise is not now. Or, we have to compromise now that we're in the general election. He's got that entirely backwards. The time for compromise is during the primary. That is why you have the debates at that time between the various candidates vying for the nomination. And therefore, that's why you see a lot of times that the candidates will change certain positions or modify certain positions during the primary process. That is when you do your compromise, because when you go into the general election cycle, that's when you have to be uncompromising. That is when you have to be doing battle against the opposition that doesn't follow what you believe. And so you see the compromise is gone. And this is part of the problem. Again, it's with people not paying attention to why we have these processes in position, why we have them in place, that it plays out each and every time to our great detriment. So what we see here is that he is now telling us that because he was unwilling to compromise during the primary process, that he was unwilling to stand up and fight for the principles, and he chose for someone who wants to abandon our principles, because if you recall, all throughout this election cycle, Trump has said that we need to remove the abortion plank, that we need to change so many aspects of our party, that he agrees with the Democrats, such as with the no fly, no buy, and if you mention due process, we cry bill. All of that comes together to show that instead of having somebody who was steadfast in our positions, we had this squeaky wheel, this loud voice, this very vocal minority that was able to go in and influence the entire electoral process by choosing somebody who does not fit with our values. Instead of finding a way to compromise with us, they were unwilling to compromise. And it's just like the argument that they made in defense of Trump all throughout the primary process of, yeah, but Trump. Yeah, but Trump, yeah, but Trump, yeah, but Trump. That is not a compromising argument. Instead, here's an example of what would be compromising. Okay, let's take the Virginia governor, the former Virginia governor that was running. His name abandons me for the moment. Okay, he says that we should have constitutional carry, but that there still should be an apparatus for protecting it based on the state level for commerce, just to make sure that commerce is protected and to ensure that all states have their say. Okay, we can maybe compromise on that, although I'm not going to necessarily because of the Constitution. But I would take that over someone who says, gee, we just need to violate due process and kick everybody out. And then, just have it to where if you're on this position with no due process, that being the no-fly list, then that's okay. And by the way, if the police do a Terry stop, meaning they stop and frisk and find a gun on you just based on probable cause that you maybe did something, then they are allowed to confiscate that gun legally, even if you have a permit for it and in fact you had done nothing wrong. These are positions that the Democrats hold and that Donald Trump holds. And of course, the first thing that the Lion Branch Trumpidians are going to try and come forth and say here is that, well, Hillary's just going to do everything she can to get rid of guns altogether. Sure. But so is Donald Trump. Because he said, I agree with her. Sure, he'll run out, and some of the few ads that he's actually run, he said that he's going to stand up for gun rights. It was actually the NRA that did it. And recall that we said that the NRA had sold out their principles, their values, their convictions far too often, more often than not, for us to even consider them a viable gun rights advocate group. And again, that was part of the reason why we pushed for the establishment of the constitutional compositionist movement. It was all there to be that we have a special interest advocacy for the only special interests that matter, are God-given, fundamental, and inalienable rights.
And see, this plays right into this whole fear-mongering again, because when people say, well, Hillary's just going to try and take away all guns, and she's going to do it by stacking the Supreme Court. Well, what's stopping Trump from stacking the Supreme Court? See, this is this is what they omit from the civil logical processing that should take place. And what it ultimately boils down to is it doesn't matter if either one of them get elected, who they put on the court, because the court's not going to function any differently than what it does now, which the court now is defunct. There's maybe one individual on the Supreme Court that is actually viable in holding and retaining his position on the bench, and that's Justice Clarence Thomas. He's the only one. And people will say, well, John Roberts, no, I don't care if he was nominated and appointed by Reagan or not. It doesn't matter, because he has already soiled his seat with both of his opinions regarding the Affordable Care Act with Obama, saying it's constitutional. Guess what, John Roberts? You're wrong. And I would tell it right to your face that you're wrong. In fact, I have no problem. In fact, I even wrote a paper on it that is irrefutable. Randy, you've read it. You know the whole minutia that's gone behind that, and the crap that I had to deal with that paper. Some of the things that I accused of plagiarism and everything else. Mm-hmm. Which is kind of funny, but the point is, with an individual like myself, not even being in law school, holding a law degree, but because I took the time to educate myself on the Constitution, because I stay vigilant in understanding it and learning it every single day, I'm capable of taking somebody who holds a position that is highly regarded as a figurehead, which a lot of people are afraid of. I'm not afraid of the Supreme Court. for the simple fact they don't have powers of contempt. They can make all the rulings they want. Let's see them enforce them. So the way that they're behaving now,
Andrew Jackson said.
yes, and considering the way that they are behaving now, which is not indicative of good behavior, which is the only requisite required in the Constitution to be able to hold their seat on good behavior, I would say that making rulings or giving opinions that are in violation of the Constitution is not exhibitive of good behavior. Therefore, they are illegitimate, in my opinion. They are not fit to hold that seat. Therefore, anything they say is contrary to the Constitution and thus has no standing, as per, I believe it's in Article 3 of the Constitution.
Yes.
So again, having the knowledge of the Constitution, see, this is what allows people to be able to weed through and see through all of the placating masquerades that are put up, all this fear-mongering. We can't have Hillary in there because she'll stack the Supreme Court and we'll all lose our rights. I highly doubt that. She could put whoever she wants in there. Again, they can make their rulings. Let's see them enforce it. Same with Trump. So this whole notion of we have to do this in order to keep this from happening, with regards to we have to vote for the lesser of two evils in order to prevent the bigger evil from getting what they want, is bovine excrement.
Of course
people have been told that they only have two choices now. Well, I'm sorry, no, you don't. You have a third choice.
Yeah. No, it's not binary. You can choose to be silent. That is voting an opinion as well. And absolutely. No, it's not, an abstention is a vote. Think of it this way. We always talk about how the Congress is able to vote. They vote on legislations, the ayes, the nays, and the abstentions. Consider when you don't vote for anyone in the presidential election, but you vote down ticket, that is considered an abstaining vote. It's an abstention, meaning that I cannot, in good conscience or in good faith, support this slate of candidates as it is. Just as if it were on a piece of legislation, if you abstained, it is, I cannot support this legislation as currently written. That is always a choice that you have. Think of it in the criminal justice system. You can plead guilty, not guilty, or nolo contendere, meaning no contest. It means I'm not admitting guilt, but I am also not saying that I'm fully not guilty. What I'm saying is the charge as it is now is not something that I can in good conscience say one way or the other. You see, there is always that option. That is part of what a Republican system of government is about. It's part of the way that you fight these things that create a tyranny of the majority and a tyranny of the minority. And again, that's part of the reason why our founding fathers, in their infinite wisdom and foresight, gave us a representative republic. Recall that Benjamin Franklin had defined a democracy as two wolves and one sheep voting for what's for dinner. Well, a democracy, in that it only recognizes the sovereign rights of a majority, will allow the tyranny of the majority of the wolves to win every time. But if the sheep can get together enough on a single type of issue to where they get a majority or a plurality enough to control, then let's say they vote to have it to where the wolves would starve to death, then you have what's known as a tyranny of the minority. What we had occur in the primary process with the selection of Trump, everybody sits here and says that the American people voted for Trump. Bovine excrement. It was a very small and vocal minority that actually voted for Trump in the primaries. Because of the way that the detente wing of the Gutless Opposition Party, or GOP, had set up the primary rules, stacking it for the front runner because they wanted it to be a very fast primary process to try and prevent the sorts of problems that they encountered in the 2012 election cycle. They allowed this vocal minority to push Trump in. And then when you had certain candidates that refused to get out when it was quite clear that they had no path, I'm speaking of rocket surgeon, Dr. Ben, I'm a victim, get me a new suit, Carson. I'm speaking of Narco Rube EIEIO. I'm speaking of John the Mushroom Kasich. Those guys essentially allowed a tyranny of minority to come in, and thereby they stood in a position that was diametrically opposed to our representative Republican form of government. And you see, folks, this is again why it is so important that you do participate. Because if you do abstain from the primary process, it allows for either a tyranny of the minority or in some cases a tyranny of the majority to take control.
Now, this brings up an interesting question when you talk about the abstention of votes, especially in Congress. Numerous times we've heard, going back, and you and I have oftentimes, had conversations with individuals say, look, we're going to look at their record. Their record of their past speaks volumes. And when it's on a specific issue, give whatever legislation it would be, let's say TARP. Okay. Well,
Okay.
when you look at that legislation and you go to Congress.gov and you look at how the votes were tallied on each bill, it tells you the yes votes, the no votes, yay or nays, and then those that had no vote or abstained.
Mm-hmm.
Now, my question is, when you have an individual and you're saying, well, what's their voting record like? Well, they abstained from voting on this. Do you chastise that individual for abstaining? And because, well, you didn't vote for this, that's why it passed, because you didn't vote. So the Democrats got their bill through because you decided you weren't going to vote against them. Not once, Randy, have I ever heard anybody say, well, this got passed, this bill got passed because this first person didn't vote for it. Not one time. But they want to take that into the presidential election and say, well, if you don't vote for Trump, then Hillary's going to win. And if Hillary wins, it's your fault because you didn't vote for Trump. See, they want to apply that logic to legislation and laws and bills that are passed because it completely undermines everything that they say. They can't keep up with that kind of a lie.
Of course not.
They'll push that away, and they'll only take that logic and apply it to one specific point in time. See, that makes them disingenuous and intellectually deficient.
Mm-hmm.
So when all these individuals that want to play this lesser two evils card say, well, Hillary's going to win, if you don't vote for Trump, then it's automatic vote for Hillary. I don't want to hear it because you fail to apply that to laws that are made that you complain about, whether on either side, whichever one passes them. People are always complaining about this and that, but they never want to apply that standard to it.
No,
if you're not going to apply it across the board, don't apply it at all.
Well, see, the whole thing is they want to be able to have this way that they can just try and dovetail it into the position that they have, irrespective of whether their position is intellectually genuine or whether it's disingenuous or not, because again, it's not about actually being upset with the individual. It's that they're upset that you're not just complying or capitulating to the groupthink that they're trying to force upon us. And you see, that's been something that has been a common denominator throughout this whole debacle and fiasco of a 2016 presidential election cycle. It's that we have allowed groupthink to replace our individual process here. But what is it that makes us work as a nation and as a people? Again, going back to this whole idea of why it is a misnomer to claim that the United States of America is a democracy as opposed to a constitutionally endowed federalist representative republic. Well, it comes down to the fact that a republic recognizes the sovereign rights of the individual popular sovereign. And so that means that by abstaining, I am exercising my fundamental and unalienable God-given right to vote as I see fit. And therefore, if none of the slate of candidates that is currently vying for the highest office in the land is going to meet what I think is a baseline standard that's necessary in order to ensure that the nation operates in a way that is healthy and in a way that complies with our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights, then I am going to abstain. I will not, in good conscience, vote for someone that I cannot, in good conscience, vote for. And that is where we are. And that is why we call it a tyranny of false unity. Because what they're pushing for is not true unity. You see, they say that you have to compromise now. No. The point of compromise, as I mentioned earlier, was in the primary. When you go and think of it this way, it's though you're writing a piece of legislation, and the primary process is at the point in which you can amend it. Well, they chose to shut the floor to debate and to prevent all amendments to the piece of legislation and put it forth. So because that has been thrust down our throat and has been foisted upon us in the form or the guise of the candidacy of Donald Trump, I am going to abstain from voting for that. That does not mean that I'm going out and voting for Hillary Clinton, because the Democrat approach is not something I'm going to support either. There are essentially let's say all of them. We'll say that there's the constitutionalists, there's Evan McMullin, there's Jill Stein, there's pot smoker Johnson, there's Hillary Rotten Clinton, and there's Donaldoff. There are 6 bills on the floor. All of them are equally atrocious in some form or fashion, meaning that I cannot, in good conscience, throw my support behind any one of them, let's say. Well, then I am perfectly within my right to abstain, and thereby I am not contributing to any one of them. I'm detracting from all of them. I am refusing to vote. That is a statement. It is a statement of moral condemnation on the entire slate. That is not being uncompromising. It's that I'm looking at it and seeing that the entire process of compromise did not result in a great compromise. It resulted in a tyranny of false unity, and I cannot support that, particularly when I think that that is disgracing the conservative movement and is operating as a clear and present danger and threat to our constitutionally endowed federalist representative republic.
You know, it's kind of in a way, somebody's out driving and they're lost. They don't know, they've lost their direction, and they come to a fork in the road. Okay? Now, everybody is always focused on what's in front of them. They come to a fork in the road, and the road to the left, let's call it Hillary Clinton, may lead you back on track to where you're trying to go. The fork in the road that's on the right, let's call it Trump, may also do the same. But nobody ever thinks about turning around and going back the way that they came from. That's the third option that you have. You don't necessarily have to take one of those 2 forks in the road. You can turn around and say, you know what? I'm going to retrace my steps. I'm going to go back to where I originated from the best way that I can, and I'm going to go from there. This is indicative of going back to the Constitution, getting back to and back on track with what set us out in our destination to begin with. When you come to that fork in the road, you can always turn around and go back. And a lot of people say, well, that analogy is ridiculous because you can't go back from where you're at now. Yes, you can.
Sure you can.
Yes, you can.
That's part of having the ability to think for yourself, the ability to act for yourself. And again, recall that our founding fathers said that the most important aspects of our system of government is that we can act for ourselves. That was the whole reason that the long, drawn-out, bloody affair known as the American War of Independence was so drawn out. It was because they were fighting the consolidated power and authority of the centralized crown and parliament in England. Great Britain was essentially saying that we were second-class citizens, that we didn't have a way to speak or have a say on issues that were directly on the ground, directly impacting us immediately here, and that we had to wait on anything or any decision being handed down from the power and authority of their centralized government. And you see, that doesn't work. Our founding fathers realized that the natural law tenets speak from being a natural order of things, that we, the people, are endowed with certain fundamental and inalienable rights. That's what the Declaration of Independence said. That was further corroborated by the Bill of Rights, or the first 10 amendments to our shared United States Constitution. All of this plays to the notion that we are the ones that are endowed with those rights. We must work together. That's where the compromise comes in at the primary process, but does not mean that if something is diametrically opposed to all that we hold near and dear, that we must support it. That is why there is always an abstention option. Now, with that said, it is time for us to begin our descent. I'm going to go ahead and send the flight attendant back with one last round of alcohol. Folks, if you don't drink the alcohol she's offering you, it does not mean that you're filling up the other bottles of alcohol we have, because that would be another type of argument for a tyranny of false unity. As always, folks, I'm your captain, Randy Wright, and I've been joined by my first officer, Jeremy Grapington. We want to thank you for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer. Please feel free to leave any questions, comments, or concerns you may have, either here at our YouTube page or at our Google Plus page. You can also follow us on Facebook, and we invite you to follow us on Twitter with the Twitter handle at Radio Aviation EX. One more time, folks, that's at Radio Aviation EX. And there you will find the departure board that lists my personal Twitter account, the personal Twitter account of my first officer, Jeremy Grapington, our Blogspot account where we're putting up audio-only versions of our state-of-the-art radio program, and then there's the Cafe Press account. Jeremy, tell them just a little bit about the Cafe Press account.
Well, again, it's been mentioned several times before. Novelties, hoodies, drinking glasses, shot glasses, ties, clocks, license plate holders, whatever the case is. And folks, I'm going to tell you right now, you can make the choice. You can vote to purchase some of our novelties and whatnot if you want, or you can abstain from doing so. Either way, we will not hold it against you for doing either one. It's your right, it's your choice, it's your vote, so to speak.
And isn't it great how a Republican system works? All right, folks, we'll see you again next time. Please do take care.